She had been awake for 19 hours when he slammed her into the crash cart. The metal edge caught her mid-spine, hard enough to send the defibrillator paddles clattering across the floor. In the bay 4 feet away, a 16-year-old girl was coding, her heart flatlining on the monitor, her lips already the color of old ash. Emily Carter had one hand on the crash cart and one hand reaching for the epinephrine when Marcus Holt grabbed her by the shoulder and spun her around. "I said now," he said. "Do you understand what my father owns?" She looked at him. She looked at the girl on the table. She made her choice. That's when he raised his hand. And that's when a voice came from the doorway, low, controlled, carrying the particular kind of quiet that belongs only to people who have never needed to shout. "Touch her again," the voice said, "and this ends very differently." If this story already has your heart pounding, stay with me until the very end. Like this video, leave a comment below with the city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Every comment means everything to me. Now let's go back to where it really began. The shift had started like most shifts at Silver Creek Medical Center started, badly. Emily Carter arrived at 5:47 a.m. through the ambulance bay entrance because the main lot was full again. Had been full since the hospital added the new administrative wing and quietly eliminated 60 staff parking spots without telling anyone on the clinical floor. She was carrying a travel mug of coffee that had gone cold somewhere on the 40-minute drive from her apartment in Delwood, wearing her worn-in New Balance sneakers because the department had been out of the non-slip floor mats for 3 weeks, and she'd learned that lesson the painful way. She was 29 years old. She looked, most days, like someone closer to 35. Not because she'd had a hard life exactly, though she had, in ways that didn't show up on a resume. It was more the particular kind of tired that lives behind the eyes of people who have spent years doing high-stakes work in environments that don't reward it. The kind of tired that a full night's sleep doesn't fix because it's not the sleep that's missing. It's something else. Something harder to name. The ER at Silver Creek was a Level 2 trauma center serving Brookhaven and 4 surrounding counties, which meant it was perpetually understaffed, perpetually overcapacity, and perpetually receiving patients who should have been stabilized somewhere closer but weren't because the rural clinics kept closing. On a slow Tuesday morning in February, it might see 60 patients. On a busy Saturday in July, festival weekend, heat indexes in the triple digits, the interstate running full, it could push 130 before noon. This was a Saturday in July. Emily clocked in at 5:52 a.m., grabbed the shift handoff from Dora Mendez, who had the dark circles of someone coming off a double and the flat effect of someone who had stopped being surprised by anything around midnight. "Bay 3's a chest pain with a history they're not telling you," Dora said, pulling her ponytail loose. "Bay 7 is the ankle from the baseball tournament, straightforward, but his dad is that kind of dad. ICU overflow in Bay 9. Dr. Tarrant already signed off on the admit order, but transport's backed up, so she's yours until they move her. And there's a 14-year-old in the waiting room, walked in 20 minutes ago with her older sister. Triage flagged it as abdominal pain, but the vitals aren't matching the complaint." Emily looked up from the tablet. "How not matching?" "BP's 94/60. Pulse is 112. She's diaphoretic, and she told Triage the pain started 2 days ago." 2 days? 2 days. She told her sister it was cramps." Emily handed the cold coffee to the trash can and went to find the 14-year-old. Her name was Jade Okafor. She was sitting in a plastic chair in the waiting area with her older sister Renee, who was 19 and had driven them here in a car with a cracked windshield and no AC, and was now trying very hard not to look as frightened as she was. Emily crouched down to Jade's eye level. The girl was leaning slightly to the right, one arm pressed across her lower abdomen, and she had the careful, controlled stillness of someone who had figured out that certain positions hurt less. "Hey, Jade. I'm Emily. I'm one of the nurses. Can you show me where it hurts?" Jade looked at her sister first, then at Emily. "It's just cramps," she said. The words were automatic, rehearsed. "Okay. Can I ask, is the pain more on one side or is it kind of everywhere?" A pause. "Right side." "On a scale of 1 to 10, what's the pain at right now?" Another pause. Longer this time. 7, Jade said, and then, quietly, as if admitting something, maybe 8. Emily put her hand very gently on the back of Jade's wrist, not grabbing, just resting, and felt the pulse. Fast. Thready. The girl's skin was cool and damp. Jade, I need to get you into a room so a doctor can take a look at you. I think your body is working pretty hard right now, and I want to make sure we're taking care of you. Is that okay? Jade looked at her sister again. Renee gave a small nod. Okay, Jade said. Emily got her into Bay 6, started an IV line, drew labs, and flagged Dr. Miriam Tso on the floor. Tso was a third-year emergency medicine resident, competent and quick, and chronically understated, and she took one look at Jade's vitals and said, "Let's get a pelvic ultrasound and a CT right now." And Emily was already on the phone with radiology before the sentence was finished. The working diagnosis: ruptured ectopic pregnancy. Jade Okafor was 14 years old and had not known she was pregnant. Her sister had not known. And 2 days ago, somewhere in her right fallopian tube, something had gone very wrong. Emily stayed with her through the imaging, through the tears that finally came when Jade understood what was happening, through the quiet and desperate conversation with Renee in the hallway outside. Renee, who was 19 and trying to hold herself together and doing a remarkably imperfect job of it, which was the correct response to what she was being told. "Is she going to be okay?" Renee asked. Emily looked at her straight. "Dr. Tso is good. The surgical team is being called right now. We caught it. But is she going to be okay?" "I'm going to stay with her," Emily said. "I'm not leaving her bay unless I absolutely have to. That's what I can promise you." It wasn't the answer Renee had asked for, but it was the one Emily could give honestly, and Renee seemed to understand the difference because she nodded and pressed her knuckles against her mouth and said, "Okay." Well, the call came down to the ER floor at 9:14 a.m. Emily was finishing Jade's pre-op checklist, waiting on surgical to confirm the OR slot, when she heard the charge nurse's voice on the overhead system, clipped, professional, carrying the particular frequency of someone relaying information they found unpleasant. "Attention ER staff. We have a VIP incoming, ETA, approximately 8 minutes. Please ensure Bay 1 is cleared and prepared for immediate use." Bay 1. Emily looked up from the tablet. Across the nurse's station, Keisha Drummond, 8 years on the floor, unflappable in the way that only people who have survived 8 years on an ER floor are unflappable, caught Emily's eye and gave the smallest possible shake of her head, the universal ER nurse expression for, "Here we go." Bay 1 was the corner bay, the big one. The one with the separate entrance from the ambulance bay, the one that had a mounted TV that nobody else on the floor had, the one that administration had quietly renovated 2 years ago after the chairman's wife had the misfortune of being treated in a room with flickering fluorescent lights. VIP at Silver Creek Medical Center meant Holt family adjacent. Reginald Holt, chairman of the board, principal shareholder in the Holt Medical Group, which owned Silver Creek and 2 other regional hospitals, had made his fortune in healthcare management over 3 decades and had spent approximately all of it making sure the people who ran his hospitals understood which direction gratitude was supposed to flow. His photograph was on the wall of the main lobby, flanked by the photographs of 2 former governors and a retired senator. His name was on the cardiac wing, the pediatric wing, and the parking structure. His son, Marcus Holt, was 26 years old and had the particular confidence of someone who had never once experienced a consequence. The ambulance arrived at 9:22 a.m. Marcus came in through the bay door, not in the ambulance but behind it, in a black SUV, wearing a fitted polo shirt and the expression of someone accustomed to rooms rearranging themselves around his arrival. He was with 2 other men, younger, wearing clothes that cost more than Emily's monthly rent, and with a young woman named, as Emily would later learn, Brittany, who was complaining of dizziness and nausea after what Marcus described as a rough morning. The attending on duty was Dr. Phil Ostro, who was technically supervising the floor but had been in the physician lounge for the past 40 minutes and arrived now with the slightly heightened alertness of someone who had just been told something important. "Marca," Dr. Ostro said, extending his hand, "let's get Brittany comfortable." Marcus looked around Bay 1. "This is fine," he said, "but I want a full workup, everything, and I want it fast." "Absolutely, Of course. Emily was not assigned to Bay 1. She was assigned to Bay 6, where Jade Okafor was still waiting on a surgical confirmation and whose blood pressure had dropped another 4 points in the last 30 minutes. She was halfway through updating Jade's chart when the Bay 1 intercom crackled. "Carter, Bay 1 needs a nurse." She pressed the intercom. "I'm in the middle of pre-op prep for a time-sensitive. Bay 1 needs a nurse, Carter. Now." She looked at Jade, at Renee, who was sitting in the corner chair and had not let go of her sister's hand, at the IV line, at the monitor showing Jade's blood pressure, 88/54. She pressed the intercom again. "I need someone to cover Bay 6. Patient is pre-op, ectopic, BP is dropping. I cannot leave this bay until someone is covering her." A pause. Then, "Keisha can cover. Get to Bay 1. Keisha was currently managing the chest pain in Bay 3 and the overflow ICU patient in Bay 9. Emily knew this because she had been on the same floor for 6 hours and paid attention. She didn't move. Marcus Holt came to find her himself. She heard him before she saw him, heard the particular cadence of someone who walked like every hallway belonged to him, heard the low voice of Dr. Ostro trying to redirect him, heard the sharper voice of Marcus saying, "No, I want to talk to her." He appeared in the doorway of Bay 6. He looked at Emily. He looked at Jade, who was 16. She had corrected herself when asked directly. She was 16, not 14. She had given the wrong age at triage because she'd been scared, lying with an IV in her arm and a monitor on her finger. "You're the nurse who won't come when she's called," Marcus said. Emily kept her voice level. "This patient is—" "I don't care what this patient is," he said. "My girlfriend is in Bay 1, and she needs attention, and you're standing in here playing hero." "Sir, I understand you're concerned about— Do you know who my father is?" The room went quiet. Not the natural quiet of a paused conversation, the held breath quiet of a moment that's about to go somewhere that can't be taken back. Emily looked at him. "Yes," she said. "I do." "Then you know that one phone call ends your career here. Sir, I need you to step out of this patient's bay." He didn't step out. He stepped in. Renee made a small sound from the corner, something between a protest and a flinch. Jade's hand tightened around her sister's. "You think I won't?" Marcus said. He was close now, too close, inside the professional distance, inside the space that patients and their families occupied, the space that had its own unwritten rules. "You think anyone on this floor is going to back you up over me?" Emily held her ground. "You need to leave this room." He reached past her. She wasn't entirely sure what he was reaching for. The chart, maybe, or the intercom panel, but she stepped instinctively to block him, and that was when his hand connected with her arm and she was moving backwards, stumbling, the crash cart catching her across the middle of her back with a sound that was loud enough to make Jade cry out. The defibrillator paddles hit the floor. Emily's breath went out of her in a short, involuntary burst. She grabbed the edge of the cart to keep upright, and in those 2 seconds while she was catching herself, Jade's monitor alarm started screaming, heart rate spiking, BP reading erroring out, and Renee was on her feet saying, "What did you do?" And Marcus Holt was raising his hand, not to reach for something, to strike. The voice came from the doorway. "Touch her again," it said, "and this ends very differently." The man in the doorway was not wearing a hospital badge. He was wearing civilian clothes, dark jeans, a gray button-down. But he stood the way certain people stand, with a quality of stillness that had nothing relaxed about it. He was maybe 45, with the kind of face that registered information and revealed very little of what it made of it. Marcus turned. "Who the hell are you?" "Step away from the nurse," the man said. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't move from the doorway. Marcus looked at him for a long moment with the expression of someone trying to calculate whether the math still worked in his favor. It apparently did not, because he lowered his hand. "This isn't over," Marcus said. He directed it at Emily. Then he walked out of the bay, and the sound of his footsteps faded down the corridor, and Renee sat back down next to her sister and put her face in her hands. Emily straightened up from the crash cart. Her back was throbbing, low and to the left, where the metal edge had caught her. She turned to the monitor, silenced the alarm, checked Jade's vitals, and found them worse than before. "Hey," she said to Jade, who was staring at her with wide eyes. "Look at me. Right here. You're okay. I'm right here." She pressed the call button. "I need Dr. Tso in Bay 6 now, and I need surgical on the phone in 30 seconds. This patient is crashing." She did not look at the doorway again until Dr. Tso arrived, and by then the man in the gray button-down was gone. Jade went into surgery at 10:41 a.m. Emily watched the gurney go through the OR doors, watched Renee sign the consent forms with shaking hands, watched the surgical team receive the patient handoff with the brisk efficiency of people who had done this particular terrible thing many times and had learned to do it well. Then she walked to the break room, sat down in one of the plastic chairs, and stayed there for exactly 4 minutes. Her back had stopped screaming and settled into a dull, persistent ache that she'd learned to recognize as bruised muscle rather than anything structural. She'd had worse. She'd had significantly worse, in contexts that would require considerably more explanation than she had time for right now. She pulled out her phone. She had 2 missed calls from a number she didn't recognize and 1 text from Keisha that read, "What happened in Bay 6?" She typed back, "Later," and put the phone away. When she returned to the floor, the charge nurse, a man named Todd Faber, who had held the position for 11 months and approached every interpersonal conflict with the energy of someone hoping very hard it would resolve itself before he had to engage with it, was waiting for her at the nurse's station. "Emily, I need to talk to you. I need to talk to someone about Bay 6 patient transport protocols, because we almost lost Emily." His voice had a different quality now, careful, pre-rehearsed. "I've just come from a conversation with administration. In light of what happened this morning, there's going to be a review of your conduct, and until that review is complete, you're being asked to, my conduct, to step off the floor, effective immediately." She looked at him. The nurse's station was not empty. Keisha was there. So was Darnell, the paramedic, who had been writing up an intake form and had gone very still. 2 travel nurses, whose names Emily didn't know yet, were pretending to look at monitors. "Todd," Emily said, "a patient assaulted me and my patient is in surgery right now because of a delayed pre-op assessment. I understand this is upsetting." He raised his hand to strike me, in front of a patient and a family member. "There are different accounts of what happened, different accounts." She said it without heat, without volume, just the words, placed carefully, like objects being set down before a conversation that required clear surfaces. Todd looked at the floor. "Emily, please don't make this harder. Just go home. I'll call you when the review is scheduled." She looked around the nurse's station, at Keisha, who met her eyes and then looked away, at Darnell, who had stopped writing, at the 2 travel nurses, who had both found reasons to be somewhere else. "Who filed the complaint?" she asked. Todd didn't answer. She already knew. She was at her locker, changing out of her scrub top, when Keisha came in. Keisha closed the door behind her, the specific way of closing a door that means this is not a conversation for the hallway. "How bad is your back?" Keisha asked. "It's fine." "Emily, it's bruised. It's not broken. I've had worse." Keisha sat down on the bench across from her. She was quiet for a moment, which with Keisha meant she was choosing her words, which meant they were going to be honest words. "Ostro signed off on it," she said. "The complaint. He co-signed whatever Marcus filed." Emily nodded. She'd suspected that too. "Faber is scared," Keisha continued. "Half the staff is scared. The Holt name runs deep in this place. You know that. People have families, bills." "I know." "That doesn't mean—" Keisha stopped, started again. "You're not wrong, is what I'm saying. What he did was not okay. What they're doing right now is not okay. But I need you to understand what you're walking into." Emily pulled her street jacket off the hook inside the locker. Under the jacket, taped to the back wall where she'd put it the day she started working at Silver Creek, there was a small photograph. Not a great photograph. Slightly out of focus, taken in bad light, someone's thumb partially obscuring the left edge. It showed 4 people in desert utilities squinting into the sun, somewhere that was very definitely not Brookhaven, North Carolina. She looked at it for a moment, then she put the jacket on. "Keisha," she said, "do you know who Marcus Holt's girlfriend is?" "Some girl from, I don't know. Why?" because her chart said she came in with dizziness and nausea after a rough morning, and her talk screen, which I ran before I got pulled to Bay 1, came back with something interesting. Keisha went still. What kind of interesting? Emily closed the locker. The kind that means someone in that hospital should be asking a lot more questions than they currently are. And the kind that means this morning was not actually about me. She picked up her bag. At the door, she paused. "Tell Renee Okafor that I'll call to check on Jade tonight," she said. "And if anyone asks where I am..." She thought about it. "Tell them I went home to rest," she said. "That part's true." She walked out of the locker room, down the service corridor, and through the ambulance bay door into the July heat. The parking lot shimmered. Her back ached. Somewhere in OR3, a 16-year-old girl was fighting to stay alive. And somewhere above the ceiling tiles of the ER, decisions were being made with money and names instead of facts. She drove 3 blocks before she pulled over, took out her phone, and returned the call from the unknown number. It rang twice. "Carter," said the voice on the other end. The same voice from the doorway of Bay 6. The one that had carried its particular kind of quiet across the room and stopped Marcus Holt's hand in midair. "We should talk. Tonight, if you're available." She looked at the hospital in her rearview mirror. The new administrative wing, the parking structure with Reginald Holt's name on it. The ambulance bay where she'd been arriving every morning for 2.5 years, carrying cold coffee and wearing worn-out sneakers, and doing work that nobody above a certain pay grade ever thought much about. "Who are you?" she asked. A pause. Not hesitation, consideration. The man was deciding how much to say. "My name is Garrett Nolan," he said. "I used to be Army CID. And Emily, I know what you did in Kunar Province in 2019. I know what it cost you. And I know that what happened to you this morning was not the first time this hospital has hurt someone they thought couldn't fight back." The heat pressed down on the car. A sparrow landed on the hood and then lifted away. Emily Carter sat with the phone against her ear and the hospital in her mirror, and something shifted behind her eyes. Not anger, not yet, but something older and quieter and considerably more dangerous than anger. "Tell me where," she said. The diner Garrett Nolan had named was 40 minutes outside Brookhaven, on a state route that ran through tobacco country and didn't have cell service for long stretches. Emily drove it in 34, which told her something about her own state of mind that she didn't examine too closely. She found him in a corner booth, facing the door. He had a cup of coffee and a legal pad with handwriting on it that he turned face down when she sat across from him, not secretively, just automatically, the way people with certain habits move without thinking about it. "You're back," he said, watching her settle into the seat. "It's fine." "You're favoring your left." "I said it's fine." She picked up the laminated menu, looked at it without reading it, put it down. "You said Army CID, past tense." "Retired. 2 years ago. I consult now, mostly federal cases." He wrapped both hands around the mug. "What I'm doing here isn't official, not yet, but it has the potential to become official very quickly depending on what you tell me." "What I tell you?" "What you already know." He watched her. "You ran a talk screen on Marcus Holt's girlfriend before you got pulled from the bay." "That's in her chart, which is protected health information." "It is, and I'm not asking you to confirm the results." A pause. "I'm asking you to tell me if what you found was consistent with something you've seen before." Emily looked out the window at the parking lot. A family was loading into a minivan, 2 kids, a dog, a cooler. Somebody's normal Saturday. "Where did you serve?" she asked. 2 tours in Iraq, 1 in Afghanistan, CID for 16 years after. He said it plainly, without the performance some men put into it. "Kunar Province," she said. "You mentioned it on the phone. Who told you?" "A man named Colonel Warren Briggs. He said if I ever came across an ER nurse named Emily Carter in connection with a case involving institutional misconduct, I should call him before I did anything else." She went quiet for a moment. Briggs. She hadn't heard that name in 4 years. "He said that," she said. Word for word. Garrett reached into the breast pocket of his shirt and laid a business card on the table. Not his own, Briggs's. She didn't pick it up. The talk screen, she said finally. Brittany Mays, the patient in Bay 1, presented with dizziness and nausea. The screen came back with elevated GHB metabolites. The concentration was consistent with involuntary ingestion within the previous 4 to 6 hours. Garrett's expression didn't change, but something in the set of his jaw did. She didn't know, Emily said. She wasn't there voluntarily in the sense that she was scared of him if you watched the way she tracked him across the room. She kept her answers small. She didn't make eye contact with him when she spoke to the triage nurse. She stopped. I've seen that before. Was any of this documented? I noted the talk's results in her chart and flagged it for the attending, Dr. Ostro. She said the name without inflection. He signed off on it as inconclusive and ordered a repeat draw. Has the repeat been processed? I was suspended before it came back. Garrett picked up his pen. Put it down again. When they filed the complaint, who delivered the notification to you? Faber, the charge nurse, but he was relaying it. It came from administration. From the chairman's office? I don't know officially, but Reginald Holt's assistant was on the floor around 9:30, which is not normal. She's never on the ER floor. Garrett looked at her for a long moment. The diner around them was low-level noise. A table of older men arguing about something involving a tractor, a waitress refilling coffee, the distant sound of a grill. Ordinary Saturday machinery. Emily, he said, how long have you worked at Silver Creek? 2.5 years? In that time, have you observed anything else that concerned you beyond today? She almost said no. The word was right there, the easier word, the word that led to a shorter conversation and fewer complications, and a life that looked a lot more like the one she'd been managing. She said, yes, Daid. It came out in pieces, the way things do when you've been carrying them for a long time without a place to put them down. Not dramatically. She wasn't a dramatic person, and the facts themselves were strange enough without embellishment. There was the matter of Mrs. Loretta Voss, 73, who had come into the ER 8 months ago with a stroke presentation and been triaged as low priority for 47 minutes, while a member of the hospital board received a hip replacement in the elective surgery suite upstairs. By the time Mrs. Voss got a CT, the window for TPA administration had closed. She was discharged to a long-term care facility 6 weeks later with permanent left-side weakness. Emily had filed a concern report. The report, per the Risk Management Office, had been reviewed and found to reflect standard triage protocols under capacity constraints. There was the matter of the cardiac billing discrepancies she'd noticed when she'd been temporarily floated to the cardiac step-down unit during the nursing shortage last winter. Procedures billed to Medicare for dates when the documented patient notes, which she'd seen by accident covering for the floor nurse, didn't match. She had mentioned it to her supervisor. Her supervisor had told her she'd misread the dates, which was possible, and she had let it go, which she had thought about several times since. And there was the matter of Dr. Rufus Calloway. Calloway was the head of emergency medicine, technically Emily's departmental chief, and he had two things that mattered here: a financial interest in a medical supply company that provided disposable equipment to Silver Creek, and a habit of ordering specific brands of disposable equipment even when cheaper equivalents were available. Emily had noticed the brand preferences. She had assumed this was standard hospital procurement bureaucracy until she'd overheard a conversation between Calloway and a vendor representative in the corridor outside the supply room. A conversation that ended with the vendor saying, "Reginald will be pleased," in the kind of tone that had nothing to do with patient care. She told Garrett all of it, flat, specific, in order. When she finished, he'd filled both sides of the legal pad. He looked at what he'd written, then he looked at her. "Why didn't you report any of this to an external body?" he asked. Not accusatory, genuinely curious. She thought about how to answer that honestly. "Because I knew what would happen," she said. "To me. And because I told myself I wasn't sure enough. That I might be wrong about the billing, that the Voss situation might really have been triage capacity, that Calloway's purchasing preferences might have an explanation I didn't understand." She picked up her coffee cup. "Those things might even be true. I'm a nurse. I know what I see. I don't always know what it means." "You're not wrong about any of it," Garrett said. "You don't know that yet." I know it because I've been looking at Silver Creek for 7 months. He watched her absorb that. The assault today, Marcus hitting you. That wasn't why I came to Brookhaven. I was already here. The assault is just the part that gave me a reason to make contact. Emily set down her cup. What were you looking at? She asked. Healthcare fraud at the federal level, Medicare and Medicaid billing, kickbacks in procurement, and 3 unexplained patient deaths in the past 4 years that were closed without autopsy review. He paused. All 3 patients were elderly, all 3 were low income, all 3 were on Medicaid, and all 3 died within 48 hours of being admitted for elective procedures that generated significant billing events. The diner noise continued around them. The tractor argument had moved on to something about corn prices. The waitress was laughing at something. Jade Okafor, Emily said quietly. Who? The patient I was with this morning, the 16-year-old. She's on Medicaid. She wasn't saying it was connected. She was saying it out loud because the shape of things had started to shift in a way that felt important to acknowledge. Garrett's expression was careful. She's in surgery? She was when I left. Then she's being watched closely. He folded the legal pad closed. Emily, what I'm going to tell you next needs to stay here. Can you do that? She looked at him. I kept information about patient harm inside that building for 8 months because I wasn't sure it would help anyone if I didn't. Yes, I can do that. He nodded. I've been working with 2 federal agencies, HHSOIG and the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit. We have a file on the Holt Medical Group that goes back to their first hospital acquisition in 2009. The pattern at Silver Creek is consistent with what we've seen at their other facilities, but it's been hard to crack because the documentation is layered. Shell companies, vendor agreements structured as donations, billing that's technically defensible until you look at the aggregate. He opened the legal pad again, flipped to a clean page. What you've described, Callaway and the supply contracts, that's a direct link. If I can connect Callaway's purchasing decisions to a financial instrument that runs back to Reginald Holt, we have something that bypasses the shell structure entirely. You need documentation. I need a witness who was inside the building, someone credible, someone whose account of institutional culture holds up under cross-examination. He held her gaze. Your military record is going to matter more than you think, Emily. People in that building are going to try to discredit you. They already are. The complaint Marcus filed will be part of that. But Colonel Briggs has offered to provide a character statement and the full documentation from Kunar Province. She hadn't expected that. The surprise must have shown because Garrett said, he thinks a lot of you. He never said that. He also never said he didn't, Garrett replied. He just did it by keeping your name in his contacts for 4 years and telling me to call him if I found you. She sat with that for a moment. Outside, the family with the minivan was gone. The parking lot was just parking lot now. What do you need me to do? She asked. What she did not expect, driving home an hour later, was to find a car parked outside her apartment building that she didn't recognize, a silver sedan, engine off, sitting in the fire lane with its hazard lights blinking. As she pulled past it, the driver's window came down. It was Darnell, the paramedic from the floor. He looked like someone who had made a decision he wasn't entirely sure about. She pulled into her spot and walked back to him. He got out of the car, hands in his jacket pockets, doing a scan of the street that she recognized from her own habits. I don't have long, he said. I told them I was taking a dinner break. Told who? The floor. I went back in after my shift ended. He pulled a hand out of his pocket. He was holding a USB drive. He held it out to her without extending his arm all the way you'd offer something in a crowd. There's a copy of the Bay 1 camera footage from this morning. The Bay camera, not the hallway one. Hallway footage is already gone. I checked before I left and the system shows a maintenance gap from 9:17 to 9:48. Emily looked at the drive. How did you get the Bay footage? I know the guy who manages the recording system. He owed me a favor and he didn't ask why I was asking. Darnell finally fully extended his arm. Take it. Because whatever they tell you happened in that room, there's what's on that drive, and those are 2 different things. She took it. Darnell, don't. He held up a hand. I've got a kid starting kindergarten in September. I need my job, so I'm not a witness to anything. I wasn't here. And you didn't get that from me. He pulled the car door open. But Emily, I saw what he did to you, and I saw what you did instead of walking out. He got in. Look out for yourself. He drove away before she could answer, hazard lights still blinking, turning the corner and disappearing into the Saturday evening traffic. She stood in the parking lot with the USB drive in her closed fist and thought about kindergarten starting in September, and about what it cost a person to do a small right thing in a building full of people who'd chosen not to. She went inside. She locked the door. She put the drive on the kitchen table and opened her laptop. The footage loaded slowly, the way video files do when they've been copied in a hurry from a compressed system. It came in grainy, the timestamp running in the bottom corner. Bay 1 was visible only partially. The camera had been angled toward the main monitoring station, not the entrance. But Bay 6 was different. Bay 6 had a secondary camera angled from the upper corner, and whoever had pulled this footage had pulled everything in the block. Bays 1 through 8, all simultaneously recorded on the same system. Emily watched Bay 6 footage from 9:08 a.m. She watched herself working over Jade Okafor's pre-op prep. She watched Marcus Holt walk in. She watched herself stand between him and the patient. She watched the moment his hand connected with her arm, and she hit the cart. And then she watched something she had not expected to see. Behind Marcus, visible in the doorway for approximately 4 seconds before Garrett Nolan appeared, was a second person. Older. White hair, dark jacket, moving with the deliberate care of someone who was there to observe, not participate. She paused the footage, zoomed in on the face in the doorway. She did not know this man, but she recognized the jacket, the specific cut of it, the small pin on the lapel. She had seen that pin before, on the wall of Dr. Calloway's office. In a photograph, a group of men in golf clothes, laughing on a course somewhere warm, and in the center of the group, the same pin, the logo of the Holt Medical Group Foundation, given to major donors and board members. She grabbed her phone and called Garrett Nolan's number. It rang 4 times. Voicemail. She typed instead, "Check who was with Marcus this morning. I have footage." There was a second man in the doorway. "Board member or donor, I need an ID." She hit send. She put the phone down. She picked it up again immediately. There was already a text, not from Garrett, from an unknown number, no name, no introduction. It said, "We know what Nolan told you. Back away from this before tomorrow morning, or the footage you think you have becomes evidence of your own misconduct. You have until 6 a.m. She read it twice. Then she took a screenshot, sent it to Garrett's number, and put the phone face up on the table where she could see the screen. Her back ached steadily. The USB drive sat next to the laptop. Outside, Brookhaven was doing its Saturday evening things. Distant music, a dog barking, someone on the floor above her walking from one room to another in shoes that were too loud for 9 p.m. She thought about the text, about the word misconduct, about what it would take to make footage of Marcus Holt assaulting her in a patient bay look like something else. She thought about the fact that they'd sent that text and what it meant that they felt they needed to. Her phone lit up. Garrett's name. She answered on the first ring. "I got your text," he said, "and I got the screenshot." A pause, and she could hear something in the background on his end, movement, another voice at a distance. "Emily, I need you to listen carefully. The man you saw in the doorway, I think I know who it is. And if I'm right, this thing is significantly bigger than I told you at the diner." "How much bigger?" The pause that followed was the kind that contained information it was taking someone time to decide how to deliver. "The 3 patient deaths I mentioned," he said. "I told you they were uninvestigated. That was true when I said it." Another pause. "One of them has just been reopened, federal level, and the family of that patient hired a lawyer 3 weeks ago who has been making inquiries that—" "Emily, the lawyer found something in the billing records that I didn't have. Something that directly connects a specific procedure authorization to a specific financial transfer." "What does that have to do with the man in my footage?" "Because the signature on that procedure authorization," Garrett said, "belongs to a board member who approved a billing code that should never have been applied to that patient. And the board member's name—" He stopped. She heard the other voice in the background again, clearer this time. "Garrett, what's the board member's name?" "His name is Theodore Marsh," Garrett said. He's been on the Holt Medical Group board for 11 years. He's also a licensed physician whose DEA prescribing number has been used to authorize controlled substance orders at Silver Creek for the past 3 years. A beat. Emily, the number has been used. He hasn't practiced medicine since 2014. The apartment was quiet. Somewhere above her, the shoes stopped moving. Send me his photo, she said. Right now. Her phone buzzed 30 seconds later with an image attachment. She opened it. A professional headshot, the kind used for foundation websites. Older man, white hair, dark jacket, photographed at what looked like a formal event, with a small pin on the lapel that caught the light in a specific way. The same pin. The same man. Theodore Marsh had been standing in the doorway of Bay 6 that morning, 4 feet behind Marcus Holt, watching. And someone had just threatened her with a 6 a.m. deadline to ensure she didn't figure out why. She was still on the phone with Garrett when she pulled up Marsh's foundation profile on her laptop. The Holt Medical Group charitable arm had a public-facing website with donor bios, the kind of performative transparency that organizations use when they want to look open without being accountable. Theodore Marsh, MD, retired, board member since 2013, former chief of internal medicine at a hospital in coastal Georgia that had closed in 2016 under circumstances the bio described as consolidation of regional healthcare resources. She searched the hospital's name, found a local news archive from 2016. The closure had followed a state investigation into billing irregularities that resulted in a consent decree and a fine that, relative to what the Holt Medical Group was worth, amounted to the cost of a bad quarter. Nobody had gone to prison. I'm looking at his background, she told Garrett. The Georgia hospital. There was an investigation. I know about it. It's in the file. His voice had the focused quality of someone moving while he talked. Emily, I need you to secure that drive tonight. Not your apartment. Somewhere it's not connected to you. Do you have someone you trust? She thought about Keisha, who had looked away at the nurse's station. She thought about Darnell, who had a child starting kindergarten. I'll figure it out, she said. I'm going to make 2 calls tonight. One to the FBI field office in Charlotte. I have a contact there, agent named Solace. She's been on the Holt file peripherally, and this is enough to escalate. The second call is to Colonel Briggs. A pause. He's not going to be surprised. Garrett. She stopped him before he could hang up. The 6 a.m. deadline. They sent that to scare me off. Yes. It means they already know you're here. They knew before you made contact with me. A beat. That's correct. So either someone told them or they've been watching you since before today. Also correct. He said it without apology, which she respected more than if he'd tried to soften it. I'm sorry. I should have flagged that risk more clearly at the diner. She looked at the headshot of Theodore Marsh on her screen, at the pin on his lapel, at the professional smile of a man who had been in the doorway of a patient bay watching a 26-year-old with his family's name on a parking structure put his hands on a nurse. Don't apologize, she said. Just make the calls. She didn't sleep. This was not unusual for her. She had a complicated history with sleep that had started in a forward operating base in Kunar province and had never fully resolved itself. But tonight, the sleeplessness had a different quality. It wasn't the restless, grinding kind. It was the alert, pre-dawn kind, the kind that had a purpose. She copied the USB drive's contents to an encrypted cloud folder using an app Garrett had texted her the link for, then drove to a 24-hour FedEx location 12 miles from her apartment and mailed the physical drive to the return address Garrett had provided, a P.O. box in Charlotte. She was back home by 1:30 a.m. She made coffee. She sat at the kitchen table. At 2:14 a.m., her phone lit up with Keisha's name. She answered it. They're changing the chart, Keisha said without preamble. Her voice was low, slightly unsteady. Not frightened exactly, but the voice of someone who had crossed a line they hadn't fully committed to crossing until they were already over it. Jade Okafor's pre-op assessment. Somebody went into the system tonight and altered the triage timestamps. It looks like the initial workup was completed at 8:52 instead of when I actually completed it, Emily said. It now looks like there was no delay in her care. The record shows she was assessed immediately. A pause. Emily, I watched you work on that girl. I know what time it was, and I know whose login was used to make the changes. Whose? A longer pause. Calloway's access code. But Calloway was not in the building at that time. I know because he signed out at 9. His code was used at 11:47 p.m. Keisha's voice dropped further. Someone used his credentials. Emily was quiet for a moment. Keisha, why are you telling me this? The question was honest, not unkind. Keisha had looked away at the nurse's station. That was a fact. Emily understood the looking away, had understood it even then, but she needed to understand the calling. Because Mrs. Voss, Keisha said. Emily closed her eyes briefly. She was my patient that night, Keisha said. I triaged her. I flagged her as low priority because the floor was at capacity and the board members' procedure had everyone. I flagged her as low priority, and I have thought about that every single day for 8 months. Her voice broke very slightly, then steadied. I'm not going to watch them bury another patient in a chart. Okay, Emily said. Okay. Keisha, don't access anything else tonight. Don't look at anything else. If someone asks you tomorrow, you didn't notice the timestamp changes. Can you do that? Yes. But write down what you know, on paper. Date it, time it, sign it. Keep it somewhere they can't get to. After she hung up, Emily sat with the information for several minutes and did the methodical work of arranging it, not emotionally, but structurally. What she knew, what she could corroborate, what Keisha knew, what was on the drive, what Garrett had, what the Charlotte FBI field office would have by morning. The 6 a.m. deadline came and passed while she was doing this. Nothing happened, which was exactly what she'd expected. Threats with specific deadlines from people who had something to lose were almost always theater. The purpose was not the action, it was the anticipation of the action, which was supposed to make her do something rash or scared. She had learned this in a context with considerably higher stakes than a hospital administrator's text message, and she had not been young when she learned it. At 5:58 a.m., her phone rang. Garrett. Solis is on board, he said. She's driving up from Charlotte this morning with 2 other agents. They want to meet with you at 10, not at the diner. There's a federal building in Alderville, about 25 minutes east. Okay. And Emily, Briggs is flying in. She took a breath. Today? He lands at noon. A pause. He said to tell you, and I'm quoting, tell her this is not optional. That was Briggs. In 4 years, nothing about him had changed. Tell him I'll be there, she said. What? The federal building in Alderville was small and functional and sat between a county records office and a closed-down insurance agency on a street that had seen better decades. FBI Special Agent Diana Solis was 41, compact, and had the economical manner of someone who had learned to waste nothing, not words, not time, not patience. She shook Emily's hand once, firmly, and gestured at the chair across from her without asking if Emily wanted coffee. Emily did not want coffee. She had already had 4 cups. Garrett was there. So was a man introduced as Agent Prentice, who took notes and said almost nothing. The third person in the room was not an agent. She was a woman named Dr. Ava Solberg, introduced as a healthcare fraud analyst contracted to HHSOIG, who had the specific energy of someone who had been working on something for a long time and had just been handed a piece that made the whole picture cohere. Emily went through everything again. She was good at this, the structured recitation of facts without editorial, the separation of what she'd observed from what she'd inferred. It was a skill that had been trained into her formally in the Army and had been reinforced by 2.5 years of documenting patient care in an environment where documentation was the only thing that stood between a patient and a gap in the record. Solis stopped her twice. Once to ask a clarifying question about the talk screen timing, specifically whether the repeat draw Ostro had ordered would still be in the system or whether it might have been purged. Emily told her it would be in the system because lab results were stored separately from the chart narrative and required a different level of access to modify, which was why the timestamp changes Keisha had identified had targeted the chart and not the lab records. Solis wrote something down. The second stop was when Emily mentioned the Callaway purchasing discrepancy. Solis and Solberg exchanged a look. Not dramatic, not telegraphed, but there. The vendor representative, Solis said. The one you overheard saying, Reginald will be pleased. Do you remember anything else about him? Approximate age, distinguishing features, anything on his clothing or badge? Emily closed her eyes for exactly 3 seconds. Mid-40s, heavier build. He was wearing a lanyard with a badge that had a red border. I remember the red because the hospital vendor badges are blue, and the red one was different. She opened her eyes. The name on it started with a K. Keller, or Kellner, something like that. Solberg was typing before Emily finished the sentence. Kyle Kellner, Solberg said, not looking up. Regional Sales Director for MedFirst Supply Solutions. He's appeared in 3 previous Holt Medical Group procurement audits. She paused. He's also a named party in a sealed civil suit filed in federal court in 2022 that involves MedFirst contract practices. She looked up. We've been trying to place Kellner at Silver Creek for 4 months. Emily said nothing. She was thinking about the corridor outside the supply room, about Callaway's expression as she'd passed, about the way she'd told herself she must have misunderstood. After another 40 minutes, Solis closed her notebook. Here's where we are, she said. We have enough for a subpoena on Silver Creek's full billing records, procurement contracts going back 5 years, and the electronic medical record system's audit logs, which will show us every access and modification made to every chart, including the ones altered last night. She looked at Emily directly. We have enough because of what you brought us, and because of what your colleague documented. She paused. I'm not going to tell you this is going to be easy. What I will tell you is that when it goes to a grand jury, and it will go to a grand jury, your account is going to be the center of it. You're the person who was in that building. You're the person who documented what you saw, who ran the correct talk screen, who refused to abandon a critical patient, and who was assaulted for it. And the board member, Emily said. Marsh. Solis nodded slowly. Theodore Marsh is the piece we didn't have. His presence in that bay, witnessed by you, documented on the footage, places him in direct proximity to the assault and connects him physically to the event we can prosecute right now while the financial investigation develops. She folded her hands. His DEA number being used on controlled substance orders for 3 years while he's not a practicing physician is a federal crime. That's the hook. The financial fraud is the body of the case. The assault on you is what makes it visible to the public. Emily nodded. Outside the small window of the conference room, Alderville was doing its Tuesday morning things. A mail truck, someone walking a dog. Ordinary. What do I need to do? She asked, for the second time in 12 hours. The question had become its own kind of answer. Ticked. The Alderville meeting ended at 12:40 p.m. Colonel Warren Briggs was standing in the parking lot when Emily walked out. He was 62 years old, built like someone who had stopped being built that way 20 years ago, but hadn't entirely lost the blueprint. His hair was fully gray, and he wore civilian clothes with the slight discomfort of a man whose body still expected a uniform. He looked at her for a moment with the expression she remembered, assessing, direct, fundamentally decent. Carter, he said. Sir. You look tired. You look like you flew commercial, she said. I did. The middle seat. He made a face. Walk with me. They walked the length of the federal building's small parking lot and back. He asked her how her back was. She told him. He asked her if she'd slept. She told him. He didn't comment on either answer. I read the incident report Nolan sent me, he said. What Marcus Holt did. It's on video. I know. I also know what they're going to do with that video if they can. He stopped walking. In Kunar Province, you made a call that cost you cover and position because there were civilians in the line and you decided that mattered more than the tactically correct choice. And you were right. You were right. And it cost you. And I did not say clearly enough at the time that you were right. She looked at the parking lot, at a crack running through the asphalt where something was growing, some weed, persistent and unremarkable. You didn't have to come here, she said. I'm providing a witness statement to the federal investigation, and I'm providing a full character assessment for the prosecution record, he said. That's what I'm here for officially. A pause. Unofficially, I came because you're one of the best people I've worked with in 34 years of service, and someone put their hands on you in a hospital because they thought no one was watching." He resumed walking. "I take that personally." She let that sit for a moment without deflecting it, which was harder than it should have been. "The patient," she said. "The 16-year-old. What about her?" "She's why I stayed in that bay. Not because of what came after, not because of any of this. Because she needed someone to stay." She paused. "I just want to be clear about that. The order of things." Briggs looked at her. "I know," he said. "That's what I mean." She was back in her apartment by 3 p.m. when Garrett called. "They moved fast," he said. His voice had an edge she hadn't heard in it before. Not panic, nothing close to panic, but the particular tightness of someone who has watched a situation accelerate past its expected pace. The subpoenas were filed at 2:15. Someone talked. From the federal side? Or from the hospital side? Someone there who has contacts inside the clerk's office. Either way, Reginald Holt knows. His attorney filed an emergency motion to quash within 30 minutes of the subpoenas being processed. Can they stop it? The motion will fail. It's delay theater. But here's the problem. Between 2:15 and now, the Silver Creek IT department has been logged into the server room. Continuous access. They're deleting files. Emily stood up from her kitchen chair. Can Soli stop them? She's already on it. She's applied for an emergency preservation order, which a judge will either grant or not within the next couple of hours. But if they destroy the audit logs before the order comes through, the chart modifications, the access records, all of it, gone. A pause. Except what? The lab records, Garrett said. You told Solis they're stored separately. Solis's analyst confirmed it. The hospital's lab system runs on a separate server with a separate vendor, and that vendor's contract requires them to maintain an independent backup. Holt's IT people can't touch it without access to the vendor's system, which they don't have. Another pause. And Callaway's server access logs are mirrored to that same vendor system because lab orders are tied to prescriber credentials. Emily understood what this meant before he finished the sentence. They can delete whatever they want from the main system, she said, but the lab vendor's backup still shows every order Callaway, or whoever used Callaway's credentials, made, including the controlled substance authorizations under Marsh's DEA number. Yes. So they're deleting evidence that proves they altered records, but they can't delete the records that prove the underlying fraud. They don't know that yet, Garrett said. They think they're cleaning the building. They're not. The preservation order came through at 5:47 p.m. By 6:03 p.m., 2 FBI agents had physically arrived at Silver Creek Medical Center and stationed themselves in the server room while a forensic IT team was dispatched from Charlotte. At 6:31 p.m., Reginald Holt's attorney issued a public statement through the hospital's communications office calling the federal action a politically motivated overreach targeting a family that has served this community for decades. The statement included a paragraph about Emily Carter's conduct violations and described the incident in Bay 6 as a misunderstanding between a hospital employee and a family member under stress. Emily read it on her phone while sitting in her car outside her apartment. She read it twice. Then she put her phone in her pocket and thought, for a moment, about a corridor in Kunar Province in 2019 and about the specific geometry of a decision made under pressure when every available option was wrong except for one, and about what it felt like to choose the one that cost you something. She thought about Jade Okafor, who had been 16 years old and scared and had given the wrong age at triage because she hadn't wanted anyone to know what had happened to her body, who had called it cramps for 2 days because that was easier than the truth. She thought about Mrs. Loretta Voss, who had come into an emergency room with a stroke and had waited 47 minutes while a board member's elective procedure took precedence, and who was in a long-term care facility right now moving through her days with a left side that no longer fully answered her. She thought about 3 patients, unnamed in the federal file, who had come into Silver Creek Medical Center for procedures and had not come out. Her phone rang. Unknown number. Not the same one from last night, different area code. She answered it. Is this Emily Carter? A woman's voice. Older, careful. Who's asking? My name is Patricia Voss, the woman said. Loretta's daughter. I got your name from... A pause. It doesn't matter how I got your name. I got it from someone who said you might be the right person to talk to. Another pause, longer. I have something. I've had it for 6 months, and I didn't know what to do with it. My mother, she told me something before the stroke took a lot of her words, about a form she signed. In the hospital. A form she said a man brought to her room before her triage was complete. Emily's hand tightened on the phone. What kind of form? She asked. A financial form, Patricia Voss said. Pre-authorization. She thought it was an insurance form. She signed it because a man in a white coat told her to, and she trusted men in white coats. Her voice went flat and specific and controlled in the way that voices go when people have made a decision to say something they've been carrying for a long time. I have the form. She kept a copy. I don't know why, she had a habit of keeping papers. And the signature on the authorization block, the physician signature, it isn't a doctor I can find on any Silver Creek staff list. The DEA number listed under the signature. I looked it up. It belongs to a physician named Theodore Marsh who retired from practice in 2014. The air in the car went very still. Mrs. Voss, Emily said, hearing her own voice come out steadier than she had any particular right to, I need you to not give that form to anyone until I connect you with an FBI agent named Solis. Can you do that? A pause. I've been holding on to it for 6 months, Patricia Voss said. I can hold on to it a little longer. Emily ended the call and immediately dialed Garrett, and as the line connected, she was already thinking past the call, thinking about what a signed document with Theodore Marsh's DEA number and a deceased patient's signature meant in terms of what the federal case had just become, about what the defense was going to look like when the evidence stopped being about billing codes and procurement kickbacks and started being about specific patients with specific names and specific faces and specific families sitting in apartments holding on to paper copies of documents their mothers had signed because they had a habit of keeping papers. She heard Garrett's voice on the line. I have a witness, she said. And she has a document. Garrett, they used Marsh's DEA number on a patient consent form. A patient who died. And her daughter has been sitting on the original copy for 6 months. The silence on the other end lasted exactly 2 seconds. Where is she? He said. I need Solis's direct number. I'm texting it right now. A pause. Emily, this is the piece. You understand that? This is the piece that changes everything. She looked through the windshield at her apartment building's unremarkable facade, the dented mailboxes in the lobby. She could see through the glass door, the plastic chair that someone had left in the entrance hallway 3 weeks ago, and that was apparently just going to live there permanently. Get Solis on a call, she said. Right now. All 3 of us. She reached for her door handle to go back inside, and that was when she saw the car. Not Darnell's silver sedan this time. A black SUV parked across the street, engine running, 2 men in the front seat. She couldn't see their faces at this distance, but she could see that neither of them was looking at their phones or talking to each other or doing any of the things people sitting in parked cars normally do. They were looking at her building, and as she watched, one of them raised a phone to his ear. She got out of her car, walked to her building's entrance without running. Running was information she didn't want to give, and went inside and up the stairs. In her apartment, she went to the window and looked down at the street from an angle that didn't put her silhouette in the light. The SUV hadn't moved. Her phone buzzed. Garrett. Solis is on in 60 seconds. She typed back. There are 2 men in a black SUV outside my building, engine running. I think we need to change the timeline. His response came in 15 seconds. Don't open your door for anyone until I call you back. I'm calling Solis now, and I'm calling Briggs. She moved away from the window. She sat on the floor with her back against the wall below the windowsill, below sightline, and held her phone in both hands and waited. Through the floor above her, the upstairs neighbor was walking again in those 2 loud shoes, back and forth, the rhythm of someone who didn't know what was happening 1 floor below them. Her phone lit up. Solis. She answered. Emily, Solis said, I need you to listen carefully because what I'm about to tell you changes your security situation significantly. A pause. We've just identified the 2 individuals in the SUV outside your building from the plate number Nolan pulled. One of them is a private security contractor with prior connections to the Holt Medical Group. The other, a pause that went half a beat longer than it needed to. The other is Marcus Holt. Emily looked at the wall. He's been released on his own recognizance, Solis said. His attorney filed a bail application this afternoon in connection with the assault charge, and a judge granted it 40 minutes ago. Another pause. We are actively moving to address this. But Emily, I need you out of that apartment in the next 20 minutes, and I need you to go somewhere we tell you to go, not somewhere you choose. She looked at the ceiling, at the two loud shoes moving back and forth above her. Okay, she said. There's a patrol unit 2 blocks from you. They're going to call your phone in the next 5 minutes with a pickup location. Do not leave through the front entrance. I know, Emily said. There's a service door through the laundry room. She was already on her feet. The laundry room exit led out onto a narrow alley that ran between her building and the Vietnamese restaurant next door, and Emily moved through it fast and low, phone in her jacket pocket, keys in her fist. Not because she planned to use them as a weapon, but because having something solid in your hand settled the nervous system in ways that were hard to explain to people who hadn't needed to learn it. The patrol unit was a plainclothes vehicle, a dark blue Ford with 2 officers who identified themselves before she reached the door and had her inside and moving before she'd fully sat down. Neither of them spoke during the drive, which she appreciated. She'd given her statement twice in the past 18 hours, and she didn't have a third version in her right now. They took her to a budget motel on the state route east of town, the kind with exterior corridor doors and a vending machine that only worked if you hit it in a specific spot. Room 114. Garrett was already there, sitting at the small desk with his laptop open, and he stood when she came in and looked at her in the assessing way that wasn't personal, just professional, just checking the inventory. You're okay, he said. Marcus Holt was outside my apartment, she said. In a car, with a hired security contractor. I know, Solis has people on him. He gestured at the second chair. Sit down. We have a lot to go through. She sat. The chair was the kind of motel chair that suggested sitting without actually supporting it, but she'd slept on worse surfaces. Garrett turned the laptop toward her. On the screen was a document, federal letterhead, dense paragraphs, the language of law enforcement bureaucracy that managed to be simultaneously airtight and nearly unreadable. The preservation order held, he said. The forensic IT team has the full server image from Silver Creek. Everything Holt's people deleted is recoverable. When you overwrite data on a hospital-grade server, the original sectors don't disappear. They just get marked as available. The forensic team has already pulled 347 modified chart entries going back 4 years. They cross-referenced against the lab vendor backup and confirmed 41 instances where Callaway's credentials were used to authorize orders that Callaway himself, when contacted by phone at 9 p.m., stated he had not placed. Emily absorbed this. Callaway denied the orders? Callaway has retained his own attorney and is currently cooperating. Turns out the man was not entirely part of the inner circle. He was being used. His credentials were stolen from a hospital login terminal 14 months ago during what was recorded as a routine AT maintenance window. He didn't know. Garrett paused. He did know about the supply contract kickbacks. That part he knew. But the DEA number fraud, the chart manipulations, the patient authorizations, those were above him. Above him meaning Marsh. Meaning Marsh and Reginald Holt directly. He pulled the laptop back and opened another file. The document Patricia Voss has. Solis sent an agent to her home at 8 p.m. The agent took custody of it, had it photographed, and entered into evidence within the hour. It is exactly what Patricia described. A pre-authorization form for a financial instrument, not a medical consent, a financial consent, with Loretta Voss's signature and Theodore Marsh's DEA number in the physician attestation block. He looked at her. The financial instrument is a lien against Mrs. Voss's estate, executed before her treatment was complete, before any prognosis was established, when she was disoriented from the stroke presentation and didn't understand what she was signing. The room was quiet for a moment. The vending machine in the corridor hummed. They were taking money from patients, Emily said. It was not a question. She was saying it out loud because some facts need to be spoken plainly before you can work with them. From vulnerable patients, Elderly, disoriented, Medicaid-insured, patients whose deaths wouldn't generate the same scrutiny as patients with private insurance, and family members who asked hard questions. Garrett's voice was flat and careful, the way voices get when the facts themselves are doing the work, and editorializing would only diminish them. The lien against Loretta Voss's estate was processed through a financial services subsidiary of the Holt Medical Group. The subsidiary is registered in Delaware and has a different name and a different board, but the ownership traces back through two holding companies to Reginald Holt. He paused. Patricia Voss's document is the first time we can show a patient's signature on one of these instruments. The others were processed through the estate after death, when no one was looking. Emily looked at the motel ceiling. Water stain in one corner, oval-shaped, old. Someone else's problem from a long time ago. The 3 patients who died, she said. Was Mrs. Voss supposed to be the 4th? We don't know. Possibly. She survived the stroke, which may not have been the expected outcome. The delayed triage, the 47 minutes, that may have been deliberate. It may have been an attempt to worsen her prognosis before treatment. He looked at her steadily. Or it may have been ordinary negligence compounded by institutional rot. We may never know which. But the lien is real. The signature is real. And Marsh's DEA number being on that form is real, and it is now in federal custody. She exhaled through her nose. What happens tomorrow? At 8 a.m., a federal grand jury in Charlotte convenes to consider the initial indictment package. Solis has enough for charges against Reginald Holt on healthcare fraud, wire fraud, and conspiracy. Against Marsh for DEA, number fraud, conspiracy, and elder financial abuse, which carries its own federal enhancement. Against Marcus Holt for felony assault and witness intimidation, the latter because of the SUV outside your apartment, which Solis has on record. He paused. Against Calloway for the kickback scheme, reduced charge, he's cooperating, but he's still going to answer for it. And Ostro, Emily said. He co-signed the complaint against me. He documented Brittany Mace's tox results as inconclusive. Obstruction of justice. He's on the list. Garrett closed the laptop. Emily, the grand jury is going to indict. That's not a prediction. Solis said those words to me about 30 minutes before you arrived. This is not a case where the evidence is borderline. This is a case where the evidence is significant, corroborated, documentary, and in federal custody. He folded his hands on the desk. What comes after the indictment is the part that involves you standing in front of people and saying what happened. To you and to the patients. She nodded. She'd known this was where it was going since the diner. Since before the diner, if she was being precise about it. I'll need to know what they're going to try, she said. The defense. What they come at me with. Reginald Holt's attorney is going to argue that the assault was a misunderstanding, that the tox screen was improperly administered, that your suspension creates a biased narrative, and that your military background. He stopped. What about my military background? They pulled your record. All of it. A pause. There's an incident report from Kunar province that's technically classified, but that a competent defense attorney with the right contacts can access through FOIA with the right framing. The report involves a situation in which you acted outside your orders and resulted in a decision that Colonel Briggs subsequently supported in his official after-action review, she said, which is in the same record. Yes, but they'll use the incident without the context. They'll try to establish a pattern of insubordination. She almost laughed, not bitterly, just at the recognizable shape of it. The way people use the one moment you diverged from the expected path, as though it negates every step of the path itself. Let them, she said. Briggs is here. She slept 4 hours in room 114 of the motel on the state route, which was 4 more than she'd expected. At 6 a.m., she showered, changed into the spare clothes she'd had the presence of mind to grab from her apartment the night before, and ate a gas station breakfast that she didn't fully register while Garrett briefed her on the morning schedule. The grand jury convened at 8. By 10:15, the indictments had been handed down. Reginald Holt, Theodore Marsh, Marcus Holt, Philip Ostro, Kyle Kellner, the MedFirst sales director whose badge she'd glimpsed in the corridor outside the supply room, Two board members whose names Emily didn't recognize, but whose photographs she'd now seen in enough documents that they had stopped being abstractions. 7 indictments, 14 counts between them: healthcare fraud, wire fraud, elder financial abuse, felony assault, obstruction of justice, witness intimidation, conspiracy, and added at the last minute based on the lab vendor backup records, fraudulent use of a practitioner's DEA credentials, resulting in the unauthorized administration of controlled substances to at least 3 patients. The arrest began at 10:47 a.m. Reginald Holt was taken into custody at the Silver Creek Medical Center Administrative Building, which was the kind of location that tended to generate witnesses, and it generated them. Staff who had been arriving for day shift and who stood in the parking lot and the lobby and the corridor outside administration and watched federal agents walk Reginald Holt out of his own building in handcuffs. He was wearing a suit. He looked smaller than his photograph. He said nothing to the agents and nothing to the staff in the lobby. But at the door he turned once, not to speak, just to look at the building, at the lobby with his photograph on the wall. And then he was out in the sun and into the federal vehicle and gone. Emily was not there for this. She was at the federal building in Alderville, going through her formal witness statement with Solace and a prosecutor named James Weatherford, who had driven up from Charlotte the previous evening and who asked questions with the specific precision of someone who had done this a very long time. He was not unkind. He was not warm either. He was accurate, which was what she needed. Keisha Drummond gave her statement at 11 a.m. in a separate room. Emily didn't see her go in, but she saw her come out, composed, controlled, with the particular dignity of someone who had done something hard and gotten through it without falling apart, which is different from not being afraid. Patricia Voss arrived at 12:30 with the original document in a manila envelope that she'd been carrying in her purse since the agent had returned it to her after imaging it the previous night. She was 64, thin in the way people get when they've spent years being a caretaker, and she shook Emily's hand in the waiting area with a grip that was steady and dry and held on for just a moment longer than a standard handshake. "She asked about you," Patricia said. "My mother. When I told her someone was trying to help, she asked who. I told her a nurse." She paused. "She said, 'Good. It's always the nurses.'" Emily didn't have anything to say to that was adequate, so she didn't try. Marcus Holt was arrested at 1:03 p.m. at a downtown Brookhaven address, an apartment in a building that had his family's fingerprints on its financing, and the arrest was not quiet. He had known it was coming. His attorney had been on the phone with the federal prosecutor's office since 9 a.m., attempting to negotiate a self-surrender that would allow Marcus to walk in through a side entrance rather than the front. Weatherford had declined. The side entrance negotiation was declined. The timing negotiation was declined. At 1:03 p.m., Marcus Holt was escorted out of his building's front entrance by 2 federal agents, while a local news camera, tipped by a source Emily would never be able to identify, captured it on video that was uploaded to the station's website by 1:45 p.m. and was the most viewed thing on that website within the hour. In the video, Marcus's expression moved through several phases in the 22 seconds between the door and the vehicle. First, the automatic confidence of someone who was accustomed to doors opening for him. Then something that cracked at the edges when the cameras were visible. Then a version of his face she hadn't seen in Bay 6, something younger, something uncertain, before the attorney stepped between him and the lens. Emily watched the clip once, on Garrett's phone, in the hallway outside the witness statement room. "Okay," she said, and handed it back. Theodore Marsh was arrested at his home in Brookhaven's north side, a neighborhood of older money and large lots and trees that had been planted before any of the current residents were born. The arresting agents reported that he had answered the door himself, which suggested either someone had advised him to cooperate fully from the first moment, or that he had seen it coming for a long time and had simply been waiting. He was 71 years old, and in the arrest photograph that eventually entered the public record, he looked it in a way that his foundation headshot had not. Emily heard the details of the arrests in pieces over the course of the afternoon, as agents and prosecutors moved through the building and Garrett updated her between sessions. She processed them the way she processed a lot of things, Not by feeling them fully in the moment, but by noting them carefully, storing them, understanding that what she felt about them would arrive later, probably at 3 in the morning, probably more than once. What she was feeling right now, sitting in a federal building in Alderville, while 7 people who had run a hospital like a private revenue extraction operation were being formally charged, was not satisfaction. It was closer to the feeling after a long surgery, the bone-deep tiredness, the awareness that the acute crisis had passed, the knowledge that a great deal of very difficult work was still ahead. At 3:30 p.m., Solis came to find her. "Weatherford wants to walk through the courtroom testimony framework," she said. "He's ready when you are." "I'm ready now," Emily said. She stood up, rolled her neck once, the left side, where the tension always settled, and followed Solis down the hallway. The testimony framework session ran 2 hours and was one of the more demanding 2 hours of Emily's recent memory, which was saying something given that the previous 48 hours had included being assaulted, suspended, threatened, relocated to a motel, and deprived of sleep. Weatherford was precise to the point of being surgical. He walked her through every moment of the Bay 6 incident in the sequence he intended to present it, asking her to articulate not just what happened but why she made each decision, because juries needed to understand the professional context that turned Marcus Holt's actions from an interpersonal conflict into something with clinical and legal weight. She told him about Jade Okafor's BP reading at 88/54. She told him what that number means in the context of a suspected ectopic pregnancy, what it indicates about internal hemorrhage, about the collapse of compensatory mechanisms, about how much time you have and what happens when you don't use it. She told him what she had assessed, what she had done, and what she had been doing when Marcus Holt entered the Bay. Weatherford listened without interrupting. Then he said, "And when he entered the Bay, in your professional judgment, was there any clinical justification for you to leave that patient at that moment?" "No," she said. "Could any other staff member have provided equivalent care to your patient at that moment?" The available staff were covering 2 other critical patients. There was no equivalent coverage available. "And you communicated this through the intercom?" "Yes." "And you were ordered to leave anyway?" "Yes." He made a note. "Good," he said, not warmly, just accurately. "Now, let's talk about the talk screen." They went through the talk screen. They went through the chain of custody on the USB drive. Darnell would be a witness, Weatherford confirmed, and had already been contacted. He had agreed, which had cost him something Emily understood and respected. They went through the Loretta Voss timeline, establishing the connection between the delayed triage and the financial instrument that had been brought to Voss's room while she was still in the process of being assessed. At 5:47 p.m., Weatherford set down his pen. "You're going to be a good witness," he said. "Not because you're angry, because you're specific." He looked at her across the table. "The defense is going to try to make this about your military record, your suspension, and what they'll call a pattern of insubordination. We're going to establish context for all 3. He paused. "Colonel Briggs will testify before you. He'll establish the Kunar province context first. So by the time you're on the stand, the jury has already heard what that situation actually looked like from the commanding officer who was there." "When does this go to trial?" she asked. Federal cases at this scale typically take 6 to 12 months to reach trial. "But you should know," he paused, "that the forensic evidence in this case is substantial enough that the defense may choose to negotiate rather than go to trial, particularly Marsh. His exposure on the DEA fraud alone is severe." He gathered his papers. "We'll see, but prepare for trial. Don't assume the easy outcome." "I don't assume easy outcomes," she said. He looked at her for a moment. "No," he said. "I can see that." Chubbed. She was given a secure location for the night, not the motel, a better option, a property associated with the Federal Witness Protection Liaison Office that was used for situations like this one, and that had locks that worked and a bed that was horizontal and clean, 2 amenities she had been undervaluing for approximately 48 hours. Briggs came by at 7 p.m. He sat in the kitchen of the safe house and drank the coffee she made him. She'd found a bag of ground coffee in the cabinet, the only thing in the cabinet other than 2 paper plates and a box of salt. And he told her what he had told Weatherford in his pre-testimony session that afternoon, which was a version of Kunar province that she had never heard described from the outside. She'd been a combat nurse, attached to a unit conducting a patrol in rough country. The patrol had taken contact. In the chaos of re-establishing position, a group of civilians, 3 women, 2 children, had become caught between the unit's line and the source of fire. The tactically correct action was to hold position and wait for air support. The action Emily had taken was to move into exposed ground with her medical bag, draw the fire toward herself as she moved, and cover the civilians behind a terrain feature while the unit repositioned. She had known, making that decision, that it was tactically incorrect. She had made it anyway. Nobody died who might otherwise have died. This was not always the outcome of decisions that felt correct, and she had known that too. The incident report described it as deviation from established engagement protocols resulting in unauthorized exposure of medical personnel, Briggs said. My after-action addendum described it as independent assessment under fire resulting in the preservation of non-combatant lives at personal risk. He looked at his coffee. I should have fought harder to have the primary report language amended. I didn't. I added the addendum and considered it handled. It was handled, she said. Not well enough. He set down the mug. The defense is going to read the primary report language to the jury. I'm going to follow it with what actually happened. He looked at her. I'm sorry it comes in this sequence. It's not your fault Marcus Holt put his hands on me, she said. No. But how this case proceeds depends partly on the jury understanding what kind of person you are. And they should have had the clearer record from the beginning. She looked at the window. The safe house was in a residential neighborhood. She didn't know exactly where, had been driven here by the liaison officer, and outside there was the sound of a neighborhood doing its evening routine. Dogs, a lawnmower somewhere, children at a distance. I called to check on Jade Okafor this afternoon, she said. Briggs looked up. She's out of the ICU. She's stable. Emily wrapped both hands around her own mug. Her sister has barely left the hospital. She's been sleeping in the family lounge. She paused. Renee is 19 years old and she drove her sister to the hospital in a car with a cracked windshield. She got her there. That's what matters. Briggs said nothing for a moment. Yes, he said finally. It is. The next 3 weeks moved in the particular rhythm of a federal investigation's initial phase. Intense in documentation, steady in procedure, occasionally punctuated by developments that arrived with no warning and rearranged what everyone had understood the shape of the case to be. The first rearrangement came from Calloway. His cooperation had been assumed to be limited. The kickback scheme, procurement fraud, credentials misuse he claimed not to have known about. But on the 8th day, his attorney contacted Weatherford with a different offer, full cooperation on a matter his client had been reluctant to discuss, in exchange for a reduced sentencing recommendation. The matter Calloway had been reluctant to discuss was a meeting that had taken place 14 months ago in Reginald Holt's administrative office at Silver Creek, attended by Holt, Marsh, Calloway, and a man from the Holt Medical Group's financial subsidiary. The subject of the meeting had been what Calloway described as patient outcome management, a phrase he had understood at the time to refer to quality metrics. It did not refer to quality metrics. It referred to a protocol by which patients meeting specific criteria, age, insurance status, absence of active family advocacy, presence of a significant estate or asset value, were flagged for what the financial subsidiary called estate planning liaison services. The liaison services were the financial instruments, the consent forms, the pre-authorization documents executed while patients were disoriented, medicated, or in the early stages of a medical crisis that would impair their judgment. 3 of the patients identified in this protocol had died within 6 weeks of signing the documents. Calloway's attorney provided meeting notes. Calloway had kept meeting notes, not as a conscientious act of documentation, but because he was the kind of anxious, detail-oriented man who wrote things down compulsively and then shoved them in a file folder and forgot about them. The notes were 11 months old, handwritten, and entirely specific. When Weatherford called Emily to tell her about the notes, she was sitting in a borrowed office at the Alderville Federal Building where she'd been working through her written statement with the prosecution's paralegal. How many patients? She asked. Calloway identified 8 by name. We're cross-referencing against the billing records and the chart modifications. A pause. We think the number is higher, possibly significantly higher. She sat with that. Okay, she said. Emily, I heard you. I said, okay. She paused. What do you need from me? Nothing right now. I'm calling because you deserve to know the scope of what you opened. He paused. This is no longer a case about what happened to you in Base 6. It hasn't been for a while, but I want to make sure you understand the dimension of what's being uncovered. She understood the dimension. She had understood it, in outline, since the diner, since Garrett had mentioned 3 unexplained deaths and the particular profile of the patients. She had understood it in the way you understand something before you have the specifics, the shape of a thing, its approximate weight, the fact that it is heavier than you initially thought. 8 names, possibly more. People who had come into a hospital sick and frightened and had been seen, in their vulnerability, as a financial opportunity by people who had built a management system around that opportunity and called it something with the word liaison in it. She put the phone down on the desk and sat for a moment, and the paralegal across from her, a young woman named Beth, who was 24 and doing her first federal case and had not yet developed the institutional poker face that came with experience, looked at Emily and said, "Are you okay?" "No," Emily said honestly, "but let's keep working." The second rearrangement came on the 14th day, and it involved Marcus Holt. He had been released on bail, substantial bail, the kind that required the full resources of the Holt family to post, which the family had done because they still had resources, and because the optics of a chairman's son sitting in federal custody while the trial was scheduled were considered by their attorney to be unhelpful. The bail conditions included a GPS monitor, restricted travel, an explicit prohibition from contact with Emily Carter or any named witness. On the 14th day, at 7:18 a.m., Emily's phone received a text from Marcus Holt's personal number. It said, "I want to talk, just us. I'll tell you what my father did, all of it. I have things that aren't in their file yet." She photographed the screen and sent it to Solis before she'd finished reading it twice. Solis called her 40 minutes later. "That text is a bail violation," she said. "We're moving to revoke. He's going back into custody today." "He said he has information." "He does," Solis said. "His attorney has been hinting at cooperation for a week, but Marcus Holt contacting you directly rather than going through counsel, that's either desperation or stupidity. And in my experience with people in his position, it's usually both." A pause. "Do not respond to him. Do not engage. Let us handle the revocation." Emily didn't respond to the text. She put the phone down and thought about the text for longer than she'd expected to. Not because it softened anything, but because of what it suggested about what was happening inside the Holt family's legal strategy. If Marcus was attempting to offer his father's information in exchange for his own consideration, the family was fracturing. The attorney who had filed the emergency motion to quash the subpoenas 2 weeks ago was presumably still advising Reginald Holt. The fact that Marcus was acting outside that strategy meant one of 2 things. He had different counsel, or he had stopped listening to the same counsel. Either way, the wall was cracking. Marcus Holt's bail was revoked at 2:45 p.m. the same day. He was taken back into custody without the cameras this time, in the processing facility, which was less dramatic than the apartment building footage but more definitive. Reginald Holt's attorney issued a statement that called his son's actions an independent decision made without the knowledge or advice of his legal team. It was the first time the defense had created public distance between father and son, and it told Emily and Weatherford and Solis everything they needed to know about the direction the Holt defense was now traveling. She went back to Silver Creek on the 21st day, not to work. Her reinstatement was pending the hospital's administrative restructuring, which was ongoing under the oversight of a federal compliance monitor who had been installed to manage the facility during the investigation. She went because Renee Okafor had called her that morning and asked if she was coming to visit Jade, and Emily had realized she hadn't answered that question yet, and the fact that she hadn't answered it was its own kind of answer. She parked in the main lot, the one she'd avoided since she'd lost her parking spot to the administrative wing. She walked in through the front entrance, past Reginald Holt's photograph on the wall, which was still there because removing it required an administrative decision, and the administration was currently occupied with other things. She found Jade Okafor in a regular room on the surgical recovery floor, moved up from the ICU 6 days ago. She was sitting up in the bed with a tablet on her lap, watching something with earbuds in, and she looked up when Emily came in and pulled the earbuds out. She looked better. Not great. She was still pale, still carrying the cautious movement of someone whose body had recently done something serious, but better in the specific way that means the worst is over. "Hey," Jade said. "Hey." Emily sat in the chair next to the bed. Renee was not there. Was probably sleeping, finally, somewhere that wasn't a family lounge chair. "How are you feeling?" "Weird," Jade said. Then, "Better. Mostly weird." "That's accurate," Emily said. "Weird is usually accurate." They talked for 20 minutes. Jade asked her about what had happened. She'd heard things, the way patients in hospitals hear things, fragmented and slightly wrong. Emily gave her the version that was true without being the full scope of it, which seemed right. Jade was a 16-year-old who had been through something significant and did not need to be additionally burdened with the shape of the system that had surrounded her that day. What Jade asked at the end was, "Why didn't you leave? When he came in and did what he did, why didn't you just go to the other bay?" Emily looked at her. At the IV line in her arm, the bruising around the insertion site fading from purple to yellow. At the monitor on her finger that was no longer alarming. "Because you needed someone to stay," she said. Jade looked at her for a long moment. Then she looked at the window. "Renee says I should be a doctor," she said. "When I grow up." "What do you think?" A pause. "I think maybe a nurse." Emily looked at the window, too. The parking lot outside, the summer afternoon, the unremarkable machinery of the day continuing regardless. She didn't say anything to that. She didn't need to. The trial date was set on the 31st day, 9 months out. Standard federal timeline for a case of this complexity. Weatherford's team had filed 47 exhibits, including the USB drive footage, the lab vendor backup records, the Callaway meeting notes, the Loretta Voss financial consent form, the threatening text from Marcus Holt's personal number, and the full documentation from Garrett's 7-month investigation. The defense entered a motion to suppress the USB drive footage on chain of custody grounds. The motion cited the fact that the footage had been obtained informally, transferred via a person who was not law enforcement, and stored on a private drive before entering the federal evidence chain. Weatherford filed the response. The response cited case law on good faith evidence preservation by private citizens, documented the chain from Darnell's acquisition through the FedEx mailing through federal custody, and noted that the footage itself was corroborated by 3 independent witness accounts, and the partial hallway footage that the hospital's own IT department had attempted to delete, and that forensic recovery had partially restored. The suppression motion was denied. Emily was in the Alderville Federal Building when Weatherford called her with the ruling. "We're on," he said. She thanked him and ended the call and sat for a moment in the small borrowed office with the afternoon light coming through the window at a low angle, the way it does in late summer when the season is starting to understand that something is changing. Her phone showed a voicemail from Keisha, who had called at 2 a.m. to tell her about the chart timestamps. Keisha, who had written her statement on paper with a date and signature and kept it in a drawer at home. Emily hadn't spoken to her since the statements were given, and she listened to the voicemail now. Keisha's voice said, "Hey, I heard the trial date. I wanted to say I'm glad it's moving forward, and I'm sorry it took me this long to—" A pause. "You know what I mean? You know." Another pause. "Call me when you want to grab coffee, the real kind, not the break room stuff." Emily almost smiled. The almost was close enough. She set the phone on the desk and opened her laptop and began, for the 3rd time, going through her written statement from the beginning, not because it needed significant revision, but because she knew now what the defense intended to use, and she needed to know her own account the way she knew her own hands. She was still reading when the door opened and Garrett Nolan came in with 2 cups of coffee from the building's terrible machine and sat down without asking if she wanted company. "Suppression denied," he said. "I know." He put 1 cup next to her laptop. It smelled like hot water with aspirations. "There's something else," he said. His voice had the careful quality she'd come to recognize as the precursor to information she hadn't been expecting. She looked up. "The financial subsidiary," he said. "The one processing the estate instruments. The Delaware entity. He paused. The forensic accountants have been going through its transaction records for the past 2 weeks, full 3 years of activity. He paused again, and she understood this pause was not hesitation, but the space he was giving himself to say something precisely. Emily, the subsidiary processed 43 instruments over 3 years, 43 patients. The asset value captured through those instruments totals. He stopped. The number is significant. Significant enough that the wire fraud enhancement changes the sentencing exposure for everyone involved substantially. How many of the 43 patients died? She asked. We know of 11. We're still working through the records. He held her gaze. But here's the part I came to tell you. Of the 43 patients, 14 had family members who had attempted at some point to raise concerns with the hospital about their relatives' care. Of those 14, he set down his coffee cup. 11 of the concerns were filed through the hospital's internal patient advocacy office. The office director reported directly to Reginald Holt. She looked at him. The concerns were received, she said. Logged, acknowledged, and filed, Garrett said. The responses sent to the families were form letters citing ongoing quality review. None of the concerns triggered an external report. She sat with this for a long moment. Outside the window, the afternoon light was continuing its slow work toward evening, indifferent to the conversation in the small borrowed office in the federal building in Alderville, North Carolina. 11 families who had asked questions and received form letters. 11 patients whose advocates had been handled with the efficient impersonal machinery of institutional self-protection. 11 files sitting in a patient advocacy office that reported to the man who had put his name on a parking structure and a cardiac wing and a pediatric wing, and whose photograph was still on the wall of the Silver Creek Medical Center lobby because no one had gotten around to taking it down yet. Weatherford needs to know about this tonight, she said. He already does. I told him first. Garrett looked at her steadily. I'm telling you second because you're the reason we have access to any of it. She looked at the wall across from her, at nothing in particular, at the texture of the plaster, which was just plaster. She thought about 11 families, about form letters, about the particular cruelty of a system that had designed its own complaint process as a containment mechanism rather than a correction mechanism, that had built the appearance of accountability into its structure specifically so that accountability could never actually reach it. She thought about Keisha's voicemail. You know what I mean. You know. She thought about Jade Okafor saying maybe a nurse while looking out the window at an ordinary afternoon. She picked up her coffee cup, took a sip of the terrible coffee, and returned to her written statement, and Garrett sat across from her in companionable silence and opened his laptop, and they worked until the building's lights clicked on automatically because the sky outside had gone fully dark without either of them noticing. At 9:15 p.m., Emily's email notification chimed. She glanced at it. The sender was an address she didn't recognize. The subject line was blank. The body of the email contained a single sentence and nothing else. And Emily read it, and then she read it again, and then she said, Garrett. He looked up. She turned the laptop toward him so he could read the single sentence on the screen. It said, I was a patient at Silver Creek in March 2022, and I signed a form that I did not understand, and I have been trying to find someone to tell for 14 months, and I think you might be that person. Garrett looked at the email. He looked at Emily. That's 44, he said quietly. She was already typing back. She typed back that night, and the reply came within minutes. A woman named Gloria Tron, 67 years old, who had been admitted to Silver Creek in March 2022 for a cardiac monitoring procedure, and had been asked to sign paperwork by a man she described as wearing a white coat but not a doctor I'd seen before, and who had kept her copy of the document in a kitchen drawer because something about the encounter had stayed with her the way certain things do when your body registers wrongness before your mind catches up. Emily forwarded the email to Solis in Weatherford before midnight. By the following morning, Gloria Tran had given a recorded statement to Agent Solis. By the afternoon, her document had been cross-referenced against the financial subsidiary's transaction records and matched to an instrument processed 4 days after her discharge, an instrument that had captured a lien against a savings account she had spent 30 years building on a school administrator's salary. 44 patients. Then, Over the following 6 weeks, as Weatherford's team processed the new inquiry line and the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit completed its forensic accounting, the number moved again. 47. 51. 58. 58 patients across 3 years, whose vulnerability had been cataloged and monetized by a system designed to look like a hospital. Each new name arrived in Emily's inbox because Weatherford had listed her as a point of contact for incoming tips. A decision that had generated some internal discussion at the prosecutor's office about whether a witness should be performing that function. A discussion that Weatherford had apparently ended by pointing out that the tips were coming in because people had seen Emily's name in press coverage of the case and had looked her up, and that a credentialed nurse who had been inside the institution was better positioned than a paralegal to determine which incoming accounts were medically coherent. She spent her evenings reading them. Everyone. She passed each credible account to Solis's team with her clinical assessment. Not as an investigator, she had no pretension to that, but as someone who could identify when a patient's description of what had happened to their body during their hospital stay was medically consistent with what they had been told versus what might actually have occurred. It was the most useful thing she had done in the 10 months since the assault in Bay 6, and she did it badly some nights. Read an account from someone's elderly father, and then sat at the kitchen table for 20 minutes not being able to start the next one. And then she did it again the next night and the one after that. The trial began on a Tuesday in April, 8 months and 11 days after Marcus Holt had raised his hand in Bay 6. Federal Courthouse in Charlotte, 4th floor. A room that managed to be both imposing and functional in the way that courtrooms in working federal buildings are. Not theatrical, not cinematic, just deliberately designed to make the seriousness of what happens inside it legible to everyone who enters. Reginald Holt sat at the defense table in a suit that his attorney had probably selected and with an expression that had been worked on. Not quite remorse, not quite defiance. Something in the middle that was neither and therefore unconvincing. His lead attorney was a woman named Paulette Greer, who was very good at her job, which Emily respected in the abstract the way you respect a natural obstacle. Marcus Holt was at a separate table with separate counsel, physically divided from his father in the room's geography in a way that made visible the fracture that had been developing since the bail violation text. They did not look at each other during the arraignment. Emily noticed this and noted it and moved on. Theodore Marsh had negotiated a plea agreement 3 weeks before trial. 22 years, federal, no parole eligibility for the first 15, full cooperation required. His attorney had announced it as if it were something other than a complete collapse of his position, which was the kind of professional obligation that required a certain kind of stomach. Philip Ostro had also pleaded. 8 years, cooperation. The medical board had already moved to permanently revoke his license before the criminal proceedings reached their conclusion. He had not been in an emergency room since the day he co-signed Marcus Holt's complaint, and he would never be in one again. Kyle Kellner had pleaded in the first month. 4 years, significant fines. Med First Supply Solutions had terminated his employment within 48 hours of his arrest and issued a statement about values that had the particular quality of a document written by a legal department. The 2 board members, their names were Harlan Price and Douglas Fett, had both cooperated, both pleaded, both received sentences in the 4 to 6 year range that reflected their cooperation and their somewhat lower position in the structure. They would serve their time and emerge into lives that had been fundamentally altered in ways that a number of years in a federal facility do alter a life. What remained for trial? Reginald Holt and his son. Colonel Warren Briggs testified on the 3rd day. He sat in the witness stand in civilian clothes and spoke for 90 minutes about Kunar Province, about the specific circumstances of a specific day, and about a combat nurse who had made a decision that deviated from protocol and had been correct to make it. He was specific. He was undeflectable under cross-examination. Paulette Greer tried 3 different angles on the incident report's primary language: unauthorized exposure, deviation from protocol, and Briggs answered each one with the same calm, the same facts. The particular steadiness of a person who had been present and remembered clearly and was not going to be redirected. When Greer asked whether it was fair to characterize Emily Carter as someone who acted impulsively without regard for institutional rules, Briggs looked at her for a moment. "No," he said, "it is not." And why not? Because the decision she made in Kunar province was not impulsive. It was rapid, which is different. She assessed the situation, identified the correct action, and executed it under fire. The fact that the correct action differed from the prescribed protocol does not make it impulsive. It makes her judgment better than the protocol in that moment. He paused. That's what good clinical officers do, and that is what she did in that emergency room. Greer had no follow-up question. Emily testified on the 6th day. She had read her statement so many times in the preceding months that she no longer needed it. The account lived in her with the particular clarity of things that have been examined repeatedly from every angle until they are simply true, just facts that happened, arranged in order, without the distortion that comes from carrying them too close. Weatherford walked her through it chronologically. The shift beginning, Jade Okafor's presentation, the triage assessment, the vital signs, the clinical reasoning that kept her in Bay 6, Marcus Holt's entry into the patient's space, the physical contact, the crash cart, the defibrillator paddles on the floor. She answered every question in complete sentences, without elaboration beyond what was asked, without anger, without the kind of visible emotional appeal that defense attorneys can challenge as theatrical. Just the facts, arranged in their sequence, spoken by the person who had been there. Greer's cross-examination lasted 40 minutes. She came at the military record, which Briggs had already framed. She came at the suspension, which Weatherford had already contextualized through Keisha's testimony the previous day. She came at the talk screen, asking whether Emily had obtained proper authorization before running it, and Emily confirmed that the triage protocol at Silver Creek, as documented in the employee handbook she had been given on her first day, authorized nursing staff to initiate standard talks panels for patients presenting with altered consciousness or unexplained vital sign irregularities, and that Brittany Mize's presentation met both criteria. Greer moved on. The last thing she asked was, "Ms. Carter, isn't it possible that what you perceived as an assault was actually Marcus Holt attempting to get your attention in a stressful moment, and that the contact was accidental?" Emily looked at her. "No," she said. "How can you be certain?" "Because I have spent years in environments where physical contact under stress is common, and the difference between accidental contact and deliberate contact is something a person learns to identify accurately very quickly." She paused. "It was not accidental. And you have no bias against Marcus Holt or his family?" "I had never met Marcus Holt before that morning," she said. "My feelings about his family are a result of what I learned after the assault, not a cause of my account of it." Greer looked at her notes, then at Emily. Then she said, "No further questions." The jury deliberated for 3 days. Emily did not wait in the courthouse. She went back to Brookhaven, to her apartment, which she had returned to 2 weeks after the initial crisis, when the threat assessment had been formally closed following Marcus Holt's bail revocation. She ran in the mornings. She called Keisha. She visited Jade Okafor, who had been discharged from the hospital 6 months ago and was doing something approaching normal, which at 16 meant school and a part-time job at the library on Saturdays and a new relationship with her own body that was still being negotiated. On the 3rd day of deliberations, her phone rang at 2:17 p.m. Weatherford. She answered it before the second ring. "Guilty," he said. "All counts." She sat down on the edge of her bed, which was the nearest available surface. Reginald Holt. Guilty on healthcare fraud, wire fraud, elder financial abuse, conspiracy, and obstruction of justice. The judge's sentencing guidelines put his minimum exposure at 31 years. At 70 years old, 31 years was a life sentence in every practical sense, and everyone involved understood this. Marcus Holt, guilty on felony assault, witness intimidation, and conspiracy to obstruct justice. Sentencing guidelines put him at 7 to 12 years federal, with his bail revocation violation adding to the calculus. "Emily," Weatherford said, "you should know. The jury foreman, when the verdicts were read, looked at the defense table for a long time. I've been doing this for 19 years, and juries don't usually do that." A pause. He looked at Reginald Holt specifically, for maybe 4 or 5 seconds. Then he looked away and sat down. Another pause. "I don't know why I'm telling you that." "I think I know," she said. She thanked him and ended the call and sat for a moment in her apartment in the afternoon light. Then she picked up her phone again and called Renee Okafor. Renee answered on the third ring, and Emily told her what had happened, and there was a silence on the other end of the line that went long enough that Emily said, "Renee?" "Sorry," Renee said. Her voice was compressed, the sound of someone holding something back with significant effort. "I'm sorry, give me a second." Emily gave her the second, and the one after that. "Okay," Renee said finally. "Okay. Is it really done?" "It's done," Emily said. The sentencing hearings happened over 2 days in June. Reginald Holt received 34 years. The judge, a woman named the Honorable Margaret Foss, who had presided over the trial with a precision that left no one in the courtroom uncertain about what she expected, read the sentencing statement in a room that was very quiet. She enumerated the victims by number, not by name, which was a legal convention that in this instance felt insufficient, but she followed it with a statement about the nature of the crime that she was not required to make and that the courtroom listened to in silence. She said that what the evidence showed was not merely fraud. It was the conversion of suffering into a financial instrument. It was the systematic identification of human beings at their most vulnerable, sick, frightened, disoriented, dying, and the decision, made in conference rooms by people in suits, to treat that vulnerability as an asset class. She said that the sentence she was imposing reflected not just the statutory guidelines, but the court's understanding of what it meant to stand in a position of trust over the sick and to use that position as a mechanism of extraction. Reginald Holt did not react visibly to the statement. He sat and received it, and that was all. Marcus Holt received 9 years. He looked at the floor when the sentence was read. He looked once, briefly, toward the section of the gallery where family members sat, and whoever he was looking for may or may not have been there. Emily, seated on the other side of the gallery with Garrett and Briggs, did not look. She had spent enough time looking at Marcus Holt. She was done with that particular use of her attention. The Federal Compliance Monitor overseeing Silver Creek Medical Center's restructuring issued its 30-day report in July. The Holt Medical Group's ownership interest had been severed through a federal asset seizure that had moved faster than most such proceedings because the financial subsidiary's records had given Solus's team a clean map of the assets. The hospital was placed under a nonprofit governance structure pending transition to a new operator, a regional healthcare system with no previous Holt affiliation. The new administrator arrived in August. Her name was Dr. Sylvia Park, and she had spent 20 years running community hospitals in underserved areas with the particular dedication of someone who had chosen the work rather than fallen into it. She called Emily 2 weeks after arriving. "I've read everything," she said. "Your personnel file, the incident reports, the federal case documentation." A pause. "I'd like to meet with you." They met in Dr. Park's office, a corner office that had until recently been Reginald Holt's, and that now contained different furniture and different photographs, and the particular atmosphere of a room being remade from its foundations. Park was 53, direct, and did not waste time on preamble. "I want to offer you a position," she said. "Not your old one, a new one. I'm building a patient safety and advocacy office, not the kind that files things in a drawer, a functional one. It would involve clinical oversight, staff training on escalation protocols, and direct advocacy for patients who don't have someone in their corner." She looked at Emily across the desk. "You would answer to me and to the compliance board. You would have authority that the previous administration never permitted anyone in your position to have." Emily looked at the window. Outside was the parking lot, the same one where she'd parked in the wrong spot and walked through the heat in worn sneakers carrying cold coffee. The administrative wing that had displaced the parking spots. The ambulance bay. "The nursing staff," she said. "The ones who stayed quiet. I need you to understand that most of them stayed quiet because they were scared, not because they didn't know what was wrong." "I understand that," Park said. "Keisha Drummond should be considered for the charge nurse position on the ER floor. She has the seniority, and she demonstrated the kind of judgment under pressure that the floor needs. I'll review her file. Darnell, the paramedic who provided the footage, he needs formal acknowledgement. Not public necessarily, but formal. He took a significant risk." "Agreed." Park looked at her steadily. Is there anything you need to consider my offer? Emily thought about it honestly, about what she had been doing for the past 10 months, and about what she was good at, and about what Silver Creek Medical Center still was, despite everything. A Level 2 trauma center serving Brookhaven and 4 counties, perpetually understaffed, perpetually over capacity, perpetually receiving patients who had nowhere else to go. No, she said. I'll take it. Don't. She started the following Monday. She parked in the main lot. The first thing she did was walk through the ER floor during morning handoff and stand at the nurses' station and listen to the staff give report, the tone of it, the speed of it, the places where people rushed through details that needed to stay slow. She made notes. She did not introduce herself as anything other than her name, because titles were less informative than observation, and she'd learned more in 10 minutes of listening than she would have in an hour of meetings. Keisha was at the station. She looked up when Emily walked in, and for a moment the two of them just looked at each other, the full weight of the previous 10 months sitting between them, not uncomfortably, just honestly. You're back, Keisha said. Different job, Emily said. Good, different, or terrifying different? Probably both, Keisha almost smiled. Yeah, she said. That tracks. The photograph of Reginald Holt had been removed from the lobby in August, leaving a rectangular outline on the wall where the paint had faded around it. No one had decided yet what to put in its place, which meant it was still just an outline, the shape of a thing that used to be there, visible only by contrast. Emily walked past it every morning. She looked at it sometimes, not with satisfaction or with anger, just with the particular attention you give to things that remind you what happens when the people trusted with an institution decide that the institution exists to serve them rather than the other way around. What she had learned, not from this case, but from everything that had led to it and everything that had come after, was that systems don't protect people. People protect people. The system is just the framework that either makes it easier or harder to do so. And when the framework fails, which it does, which it always eventually does in some way or another, the question is whether there is a person in the room willing to stand between the patient and the harm. Not a perfect person, not a person without fear or doubt or history, just a person who makes the decision in the moment that requires it to stay. She had not set out to be that person at Silver Creek. She had set out to do her job, which was hard enough on its own. The staying had happened because a 16-year-old girl's blood pressure was 88/54, and there was no one else in the room, and the math was simple, even when everything else was complicated. That was the part she tried to hold on to, on the hard days. Not the verdict, not the sentences, not the federal case with its 47 exhibits and its 58 victims and its 34-year sentencing statement. Those things mattered. They mattered enormously, to the families who had waited, to the patients who had survived, to the ones who hadn't left anyone to wait. But they were the consequence of something smaller and simpler, a decision made in a patient bay on a bad morning by a tired person who had not yet had a full cup of coffee and whose back hurt and who looked at a 16-year-old girl and thought, not on my watch. Quote, in October, Jade Okafor turned 17. Renee brought her to Silver Creek, not as a patient, just to visit. They found Emily in the new patient advocacy office, which was on the second floor and had a window, and as of that week, a door that actually closed properly after facilities finally fixed the hinge. Jade looked like herself. Better than herself, maybe. The version of herself that existed on the other side of something hard, which is always different from the version that went in. She stood in the doorway of the office and looked around at the small room with its filing cabinet and its whiteboard and its view of the parking lot. This is where you work now, she said. It's a step up from the break room, Emily said. Jade looked at the whiteboard, which had a handwritten list of 3 names on it, patients currently without family advocacy, whose cases Emily was monitoring. She looked at it for a moment with an expression Emily couldn't fully read. I'm taking a biology class this year, Jade said. My teacher says I'm good at it. Your teacher is probably right, Emily said. Jade looked at her. Do you like it, this job? Emily thought about the honest answer, which was more complicated than yes or no, which was that she liked the days when she could see clearly what she was doing and why it mattered, and that there were other days when the paperwork was suffocating and the bureaucracy was defeating, and she went home feeling like she'd moved nothing and that both kinds of days were part of the same work, and that she had learned to tell the difference between difficult and wrong. "Yeah," she said, "I like it." Jade nodded, absorbing this with the seriousness she apparently brought to most things. Then Renee touched her arm and said they should probably get going, and they said goodbye, and Emily listened to their footsteps recede down the second-floor hallway. She turned back to her desk, to the whiteboard, to the 3 names written on it in her own handwriting, each one a person in this building who did not have someone watching their corner. She picked up her pen. Outside, Brookhaven was doing what it always did. The ordinary, persistent business of being a place where people lived and got sick and got better and sometimes didn't, where families drove through the night in cars with cracked windshields, where nurses came in through the ambulance bay at 5:47 a.m. with cold coffee, where the work was never finished and the stakes were always real. She had taken the uniform off 5 years ago. She had not, it turned out, taken anything essential with it. Later that evening, standing outside the hospital at the end of her shift, the October air sharp, the parking lot lights just coming on, the sky doing its blue to dark thing over the tree line to the west, she stood for a moment and didn't think about any of it in particular. Not the trial, not the sentencing, not the 58 names, not the form letters sent to 11 families who had asked the right questions to the wrong people. She thought about Jade saying maybe a nurse and looking out the window. She thought about Keisha calling at 2 a.m. She thought about Darnell standing in the parking lot with a USB drive, saying, "I need my job," and handing it to her anyway, that ordinary, costly, human thing. She thought about what it means to work inside a broken system and decide every day that the breaking is not the final word, that the patients in the waiting room are real and the work is real, and the moment of decision, when it comes, and it comes, is the only moment that matters. The mission, she had said. She'd meant it. She walked to her car. She drove home. Tomorrow she would come back. That was enough. That had always been enough.